안녕하십니까. 오늘 2014년도 스테피 국제 미래 심포지엄에 참석해주신 여러분들께 감사의 인사를 드립니다. 저는 오늘 행사의 사회를 맡게 된 스테피 미래연구센터의 홍성주입니다. 반갑습니다. 먼저 오늘의 행사를 빛내주시기 위해 참석해주신 주요 인사와 연사분들의 인사 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 과학기술정책연구원의 송종국 원장님 오셨습니다. 큰 박수로 한번 부탁드립니다. 다음으로 유네스코에서 리엘 밀러 박사님께서 오셨습니다. 고맙습니다. 다음으로 핀란드 총리실에서 율라 로젠스트롬 박사님 오셨습니다. 감사합니다. 다음으로 캐나다에서 임란 어셔드 박사님 오셨습니다. 네, 다음으로 OECD에서 데이드레 컬레이 박사님 오셨습니다. 네, 마지막으로 싱가포르에서 사이파크 애널리스트 오셨습니다. 님께서 오셨습니다. 반갑습니다. 그리고 저희 스테피 연구소의 미래연구센터 센터장님이신 박병원 박사님 오셨습니다. 감사합니다. 과학기술정책연구원은 글로벌 차원의 불확실성과 복잡성에 대처하기 위해 미래지향적 정책 수립을 주제로 오늘 심포지엄을 개최하게 되었습니다. 본 행사는 정부의 기획재정부와 미래창조과학부가 후원합니다. 오늘 심포지엄은 개회사 및 6개의 주제 발표로 이루어집니다. 첫 세션은 유네스코, 핀란드, 캐나다 사례 발표로 구성이 되고요. 그 이후에 약 20분간의 커피 브레이크를 가지도록 하겠습니다. 그 다음 두 번째 세션은 OECD, 싱가포르, 한국의 발표로 이루어질 테고요. 그 발표 6가지 주제가 끝난 이후에 30분 정도의 플로어와의 자유토론 시간을 가지도록 하겠습니다. 본 행사가 국제미래 심포지엄인 만큼 국민 의뢰는 생략하도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 일전에 공지드린 바와 같이 저희 행사는 동시통역 서비스를 제공합니다. 여러분들 테이블에 있는 기기에 채널 1번을 맞추시면 원하시는 통역 서비스를 받으실 수가 있겠습니다. 그럼 먼저 과학기술정책연구원 송종국 원장님의 개회사가 있겠습니다. 저희 원장님을 연단으로 모시겠습니다. 환영의 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
네, 안녕하십니까. 아마 이게 올해로 두 번째 저희가 주관하는 미래 연구와 관련된 국제 세미나인 것 같습니다. 오늘 바쁘신데도 이렇게 많이 참석해 주신 여러분들께 감사드리고요. 또 멀리 해외에서 긴 시간 한국에 오신 분들께도 감사를 드리겠습니다. 잘 아시다시피 우리나라는 지난 50년 동안 경제사회적인 발전을 많이 이룩해 왔습니다. 그렇지만 지금 한국이 직면하고 있는 위기는 그 어느 때보다도 준엄한 것 같습니다. 경제 성장이 정체가 되어가고 고용이 아마 유발되지 않고 또 그리고 갈수록 복잡하고 불확실한 이 세계 정세가 우리의 이런 현실을 더욱더 위험하게 만드는 것 같습니다. 따라서 이거는 대한민국만의 문제가 아니고 글로벌 차원에서 모든 국가가 당면해 있는 문제라고 생각합니다. 그래서 저희 오늘 미래 연구와 관련된 국제 세미나는 이러한 복잡하고 불확실한 세계의 정세를 여러 전문가들이 모여서 같이 함께 고민하고 풀어나가려고 하는 데 그 의미가 더 크다고 생각합니다. 우리나라를 포함해서 세계 각국은 새로운 미래 도전에 대비하기 위해서 많은 노력들을 하고 있습니다. 하지만 글로벌 시대의 전 지구적 이슈들이 우리 모두에게 긴밀하게 연결되어 있기 때문에 우리 국내 차원이 아니라 글로벌 차원에서 근본적인 해결책을 제시를 해줘야만 하는데 그렇지 못하고 있습니다. 우리 미래 연구 역시 미래 비전을 실현하기 위한 구체적인 정책으로 승화하기 위해서는 보다 효과적인 방법을 찾는 노력이 필요할 것입니다. 또 이를 실행하는 과정에서 다양한 이해 관계자들을 설득시키고 또 갈등을 풀어나가야 하는 현실적인 문제에 봉착해 있습니다. 오늘 저희 국제 미래 세미나의 주제가 Linking Foresight to Strategic Public Policy라는 주제로 정부의 미래 전략을 수립하고 정책을 만드는 담당자들을 모시고 깊이 있는 논의를 할 계획으로 있습니다. 이번 심포지움을 통해서 각국의 미래 연구가 어떻게 정책에 연계가 되고 활용될 수 있는지 각자의 경험을 우리 나누어 보는 자리를 가지려고 합니다. 또 이를 통해서 우리의 관점에서도 필요한 전략과 대안의 단초를 찾아볼 수 있기를 기대를 합니다. 오늘 이 자리가 미래 연구에 기반한 혁신 정책의 기반을 닦는 출발점인 동시에 다양한 국가들과의 상호간 공동 연구를 통하여 필요한 소통의 갈증을 해소할 수 있는 자리가 되기를 희망합니다. 참석해 주신 여러 발표자 여러분들과 토론자 여러분들께 다시 한번 감사를 드리고 오늘 좋은 의견들을 많이 주시고 또 참석해 주신 프로에 계신 많은 전문가 또 참여자분들께서도 우리 미래 연구에 좀 더 관심과 성원을 보내주시고 오늘 이 자리에서 좋은 의견을 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 다시 한번 여러분께 감사의 말씀을 드리고 멀리서 한국에 저희 세미나에 참석해 주신 분들은 한국에 계시는 동안 즐거운 시간을 보내시기를 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.
정책연구원의 성종국 원장님의 개회사가 있었습니다. 개회사 중에 잠시 한국과학기술기획평가원의 박영하 원장님께서 참석해 주셨습니다. 잠시 청중분께 인사 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 첫 번째 세션을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 발표는 유네스코 포사이트의 대표이신 리엘 밀러 박사님의 발표가 되겠습니다. 리엘 밀러 박사님의 발표 주제는 예측적 리더십, 유네스코와 미래 이해도에 대한 것입니다. 자, 지금부터 밀러 박사님의 발표를 시작하도록 하겠습니다.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I always find it fascinating and stimulating to be here in Korea. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, all the people who have come here to think and work with us today about Foresight. I have a few slides that I want to present to you. I'm going to go rather quickly, so my apologies, but perhaps I'll give you an overview of some of the things that are going on. Foresight today is something that's very high in the minds of many different governments, many different organizations, public and private. And we've heard already why that's the case, because there's concern about uncertainty, concern about the effectiveness of policy and choice. And so the question becomes, how can we be more capable in using the future So I can link the title here, Linking Foresight to Strategic Public Policy. What is the future? What is strategy? What is public policy? What is the role of agency in the creation of collective conditions? And finally, changing the conditions of change, how to create the conditions that enhance humanity's capacity to be free. So that's the way I've sort of parsed out the topic of this conference, and I want to go through fairly quickly these different topics. What is the future? Well, this is one of the kind of mysteries that we face. People use the future all the time. You use the future to come here because you thought, I will travel to a place, and you arrived here. I've been using a term that I call futures literacy, and I want to go very quickly through the idea of futures literacy to give you a basic reference point with respect to the future. Anticipation is something that's common in our universe. It's common because our universe is characterized by time and space. And both time and space have anticipatory components in them. So anticipation is something that's very basic to our universe. There's three basic building blocks of the discipline of anticipation. Anticipatory systems that encompass both animate and inanimate anticipation, distinguishing different models. There are three distinct dimensions for imagining the future, and different methods are related to each. There's contingent, optimized, and novel. I'll illustrate that in a minute. There's the idea of how to go about doing this. And I want to talk to you about a method that we've been using that I think is a fairly general methodology. It's a learning methodology that allows us to encompass the future, to integrate the future, to use the future more effectively. So it's learning by doing, processes that use collective intelligence to discover and advance specific knowledge, action research processes for discovering, reframing, and questioning anticipatory assumptions. In conscious human anticipation, which is what we're talking about, conscious human anticipation, the fundamental data source are anticipatory assumptions. Once you know the anticipatory assumption, you can derive the image of the future. Everybody in this room knows the future does not exist as something we can touch. There's no future that you can find evidence about because the future is not there. Where the future acts and has presence is now. In our ideas of the future, the way we imagine the future. So, Bugs Bunny anticipates because Bugs Bunny is not in his hole when the hunter shoots. That's anticipation. Bugs Bunny is perfect at anticipating because the author always makes sure that Bugs Bunny isn't in the hole. Trees anticipate. So in nature there's anticipation. Our immune system anticipates without asking us. We have many, many examples of anticipation that is not conscious. And the lesson that's important here is to understand that anticipation is a fundamental category of our universe. And therefore, if we are to understand the future and how to use the future, we need to think of many anticipatory systems and many anticipatory processes. And to be very blunt, we're only at the beginning. We have not spent a great deal of our research effort on thinking about anticipatory systems, but that's starting to change. Robert Rosen wrote a book on mathematical biology. This was in 1985. And in this we have an anticipatory systems view. I won't go into detail, but it's to illustrate to you that there's a movement underway to understand anticipatory systems in a more advanced, more sophisticated, more complete manner. So the second part of futures literacy and the discipline of anticipation is distinguishing three different dimensions of the potential of the present. So if you're going to become more futures literate, become more capable of using the future effectively, these three dimensions are the starting point for understanding different ways, different reasons, different objects of the future. The first one is contingency, and we do this all the time. We prepare. We prepare for things over the exit there, you see it? There's a little green sign. We've prepared for a fire. We've prepared for an earthquake. We've prepared. But there's no fire right now. There's no earthquake right now. And what might happen could be something completely different. But we prepared for that with the sign over the exit. There's also positive preparation. We imagine good things happening all the time. And we prepare for those as well, for good things to happen. We're also very effective. Humans are very practiced at optimization, planning. In a less positive way, I can call that our attempt to colonize the future. We attempt to impose our idea of the future on the future. We build a pyramid, and the pyramids in Egypt last 5,000 years. We impose our view of tomorrow on tomorrow. We create legacy systems, like DOS, and they stay with us. But these are systems that assume that we know the goals, we know the rules, and we know the resources. They assume that. But everybody in this room knows that these assumptions cannot hold for complex, emergent social systems. I'm not talking about complicated. A chess game is complicated. A chess game can be, a computer can be very powerful in helping to play chess because you don't change the rules. You don't have the possibility of a birth control pill. You don't have the possibility of divorce. You don't have the possibility of changing the values of the society, its aspirations. But when you change those rules, the computer can't play the game anymore. So that leaves us with novelty and the challenge of reframing. This is the third category, and it's a very important category. But it's a category that we are, in part, because of our success in planning, our success in imposing our view on the future, which in many ways is an illusion, because it's a story we tell ourselves to reassure ourselves. But in any case, we believe that story. We believe we can colonize the future. And so we're less practiced and less able to encompass, to embrace novelty. But novelty is the source of wonder in our universe and the source of freedom. Without novelty, we would live in a deterministic universe where if you had all the data and a perfect model, you could predict everything. And therefore there would be no freedom. But we know from science, natural science, and from our own observations, that there is creativity in the universe. Very strange, by the way. Why should there be? But there it is. And so the question becomes, how do we move beyond this? This is extrapolation. This is not very imaginative. We've been doing this for more than 100 years. New York was flying cars, extrapolating the existing systems. So, one way of addressing this question of how to become more futures literate, how to become better at using the future, is to use futures literacy. And for me, this is about being able to describe things. This is a painting from the 15th century. It's very difficult to describe. I've done hundreds of workshops asking people to think about the future. I could ask people here, what do they think would be the first step in open heart surgery? You'd say, well, wait a second, I'm not an open heart surgeon. How do I know? But very often it's the same thing. If I ask people, what's the future of Korea? They say, oh, wow, I'm not an expert. And we have an expert approach towards things, and we think that people should be experts. But that also disempowers them. It eliminates their knowledge. So one of the questions becomes, how do we give people the capacity to tell stories about the future? To be able to imagine the future in open, powerful ways that are meaningful to them. Disciplined design of collective intelligence processes to reveal and invent anticipatory assumptions, specific repetition and difference. Being able to identify repetition and difference in people's lives. I call this the microscope of the 21st century. You know, the microscope was invented long ago, in the 17th century, in the Netherlands, and they discovered bacteria. It's fantastic. You have a drop of water. You look at the water, it looks clear. You take the microscope, you look at the water, it's full of things swimming along. The invisible becomes visible through a tool that we have invented. The idea of collective intelligence, knowledge creation, is to turn the invisible visible. Everybody in this room has tacit knowledge. Everybody in this room has things that they know, that they don't express, that they don't make explicit. If I ask you to work together and to articulate what you think about the future, you will identify your anticipatory assumptions, because you will describe the future, and you have no choice when you describe the future. You must use a model, because the future does not exist, and you must invent it. And you can only invent it on the basis of a model. And that model can only be constructed on the basis of assumption. And so you will reveal your assumptions. So we can use collective intelligence, the microscope of the 21st century, to reveal the way people tell stories, the things that they know that are their specific, and their capacity to reframe. Because once you become aware of your assumptions, you can begin to change them. You can begin to invent new assumptions. And when you invent new assumptions, you see new things. I'll go very quickly through what is strategy. To me, it's about thinking about change. There are different kinds of change. Substitution, where the traffic cop is replaced by the traffic light. We were talking about telepresence, which replaces meetings. It's a substitution effect. You have complementarity, where the telephone works in tandem with meeting people, as opposed to what they expected. People said, the telephone will reduce human contact. Facebook will destroy social relations. And it turns out that it complements them, that there's a complementarity. And then there's the emergence, this kind of change. The Model T Ford and the suburb. These kinds of change evoke a question about strategy. Thinking about complex emergence. Change within the system, inside in, outside in. Change outside the system, inside out, outside out. Much of what we do is inside in. And it's very good. It's continuous improvement. It's the innovation and creativity of design within the existing system to improve existing methods. It's very important. It's fundamental. But the strategic question is not how I improve the existing strategic framework. That's something you should do. The strategic question is there another strategy? If instead of finding 10 ways to go to the top of Mount Everest, I don't go to the top of Mount Everest at all. I go into the valley. Completely different. That's strategic choice. That's the choice that the military often faces when the famous phrase, do not fight the last war, fight this war. But we're very tempted to improve on the way we fought the last war, not imagine changes in the conditions of change. So there's a strategic challenge to think outside of that. What is public policy? Again, I want to go very quickly and think about change in a very broad sense. If we can look at, on one axis, the manageability and clarity of goals, and look at reflexivity, which means our relationship to the redefinition and the multiple meanings of things, we can see a regime in agricultural society, industrial society, and a learning society. And you're in different contexts at different times. This calls for a change in the way we use the future. It shifts the relationship to the construction of the collective. If it's not top-down, to put it in more simple terms, if it's not top-down, it's a different system for creating the collective. I presume everybody in this room has a cell phone. But nobody was told to go get a cell phone. There was no king who said, every one of my subjects must have a cell phone. But you all bought cell phones. And because you all bought cell phones, you changed the collective conditions. It's not just the state. It's not just the nation. Our collective conditions are not just public policy. They're the collective creation of the conditions we live in.
What's the role of agency in the creation of collective conditions? I just want to point out that the role of agency is rather limited. I think we need to have some modesty in the way we change those conditions. And this is an illustration of the extent to which the significant transformation of the collective conditions was accompanied by death, destruction, transformation, the repudiation of existing paradigms. It's not easy to make the transition from one to the next. And many times, the habits, the patterns, the beliefs, the assumptions that characterize one period have to be transformed to create the conditions for another period. What we do and how we do it changes. Finally, changing the conditions of change, how do we create the conditions that enhance humanity's capacity to be free? I call it walking on two legs. You'll recall that from the Maoist slogan about two paradigms, the peasants and the industrial worker. How to pursue a better future, reframing human agency. Close, what we prepare for, contingent futures, what we attempt to create, what we plan for, and open, what we discover, revealing what we did not know we knew. The unknowable. New sense-making and inventing the unknowable. We invent language. We invent models. But we need, if we want to appreciate novelty, to be better at throwing away the old glasses and experimenting with new glasses. We might bring back the old glasses. Don't throw them away too far. But our ability to shift our view becomes central to understanding the capacity to distinguish between search from choice and to be less biased towards path dependency and colonizing the future, the end of history illusion, which is very common. So I'm going to end by saying that I think if we understand what it means to be futures literate, and I think foresight is part of that sensitivity, and I think one of the reasons we're talking about foresight is because we're trying to grapple with these issues. Less arrogant, less fearful, more imaginative, more able to include birth and death, the end of things and the beginning. Investing more in appreciating novelty, opening up agency to doing and not doing, which is not action in action, but planning distinguished from the capacity to be free through improvisation. I was mentioning Lao Tzu before, the philosopher, the Chinese philosopher, the Tao Te Ching, which over and over again takes a humble position about knowing. The capacity to be free calls for walking on two legs, open and closed systems thinking, humility about outcomes, get better at surfing, the richness of experimentation. Experimentation happens all around us, all the time. But how much do we appreciate it? How much can we understand? What's our capacity to understand those experiments? The intended and the unintended, the endogenous and the exogenous, creating the conditions for non-hierarchical appreciation that doesn't fit into the existing system, and sense-making that gives meaning to the ephemeral and not just the durable, but also the ephemeral. Improvisation and spontaneity. It's becoming better at understanding how to do these things. And just so that, I've been very theoretical and very high level in discussing this, just so that you understand that I'm a designer and a practitioner, and that what I'm talking to you about comes from practice. That's what UNESCO has been doing in the last 18 months. All of these have been futures literacy knowledge laboratories. And you can see we did everything from imagining the future of sports, to inhabiting the planet Earth, to thinking about the future of Ecuador, to addressing the future of education in Myanmar, to resilient cities, to sustainability. These are practical exercises. What do? They build futures literacy, learning by doing. We did one in Ottawa recently, on open innovation systems. I'll close here. This is often the way people want to think about the future. Where's the great leader? Where's the great expert who will tell me how to get from A to B? That will tell me how to prepare for the future, how to plan for the future, so I can always win, so I can always avoid the crisis, so that I can live in a universe where we never go too high, too low, always at the right spot. The world is not like that, and I'm very glad it's not like that. because otherwise there would be no freedom, there would be no emergence, there would be no novelty. So, how we anticipate matters, it changes the present. And if we become futures literate, we can change the conditions of change. Thank you very much.